masked men ransacked the building and made off with half a ton of cash, enough to fill 75 suitcases, totaling £53 million. Bound, gagged, and locked in cages fearing death was imminent, their lives were forever changed by the events that unfolded that night. It's been more than a decade since the robbery was pulled off, and while several men served lengthy sentences behind bars, there are still loose ends police have to tie up. It's believed that the plot began to take shape in July 2005 between several men named as Roger Coutts, Stuart Royal, Leo Rusher, Jetmir Bukpapa, Emir Hensaj, and former mixed martial arts fighter Lee Murray. It took more than 6 months of careful planning and observation to fully understand the inner workings of the Kent Securitas headquarters. Before Christmas 2005, Hensaj began working at the depot, establishing himself as the gang's inside man. Using a camera roughly the size of a coin, which he had fitted to his belt, the Albanian-born East Sussex resident spent the next few weeks filming the inner workings of the site. Hensaj's recordings showed that the 24-hour depot was used to store large sums of money for retail outlet shops and supermarkets, as well as the Bank of England. It resembled a bunker and was surrounded by a tall steel fence. The building had no windows other than small hardened glass portals, giving control room staff the ability to view those entering or exiting the site. Those delivering or collecting had to transfer the cash air via airlocks between the building and the vehicle so that staff outside would not access the building. The crucial part to their plan was that any cash not being counted or sorted by staff was kept in the depot's internal vault, a strong room with 2 doors and a double key system that couldn't be accessed by any single person except one, the depot's manager, Colin Dixon. In order to access the vault, they would need him and his cooperation. After secretly surveying his home and the depot, gathering a convoy of vehicles and approaching makeup artist Michelle Hogg for prosthetic disguises, the gang believed they had the means and the opportunity to make a successful strike on the depot. In February 2006, leaving his office at the end of the day, the 51-year-old Colin went into his silver Nissan Almera vehicle to begin his 80-kilometre journey back to his home, and he texted his wife whilst he was in the car. Over in Herne Bay, Colin's wife, 45-year-old Lynn, was at home making dinner for her family when she received a text message from her husband saying he has left work and will be home as soon as possible. At around 6:30, whilst driving along the A249 just outside of Stockbury, Colin noticed flashing blue lights in the rearview mirror on the front of a Vauxhall Vectra. Assuming that the vehicle behind him is an unmarked police vehicle, Colin pulls over to the side of the road near the Three Squirrels pub in Dentning Hill. An officer exits the vehicle, approaches Colin and accuses him of speeding several times in recent weeks, which confuses Colin as he had been well within the speed limit. He was confident that it was just a mistake and that he will soon be on his way. Colin then gets ushered into an unmarked vehicle, and once inside the car, the officer handcuffs him and tells him he's going to be taken to the station. Outraged at his treatment by the officers, he demanded to see identification. Instead, the police officer pulled a gun on Colin and told him to do as he's told, and they said, "We are not fucking about." At around 7 p.m. during the journey, the apparent officers removed Colin from the Vauxhall and put him into the back of a white van, where he remained for the rest of the trip, bound and gagged, helplessly wondering where he was being taken to. Colin had in fact been kidnapped by a ruthless gang who were carrying out what would become the world's second largest money heist. He was driven along the M20 to the Westmoreland bypass, where he was bound and thrown into a white van. The white transit van carrying Colin arrived at a remote location, which was later discovered to be Eldon Farm. The gang members tied Colin up and interrogated him about the Securitas depot's layout. Back in Herne Bay, 2 robbers disguised as policemen knocked on the door of Colin's family home, where his wife and 7-year-old son Craig lived. When Lynn opened the door, the officers told her that her husband had been hurt in an accident and is on his way to the hospital. They offered to take her and her son to the hospital to meet him. Carrying her young son, Lynn left the house and approached a Volvo parked outside. At this point, she realised that something was wrong and began to resist. She began to scream, but one of the men clasped his hands over her mouth and told her that they were armed and will use their guns if she doesn't cooperate. Her and her son were forced into the back of the vehicle. Approximately 20 minutes later, after Lynn and Craig were kidnapped, the pair were transferred to another vehicle in the Faversham area. This time, they were ushered into a red LDV van with a Parcel Force logo on the side. Lynn and her son arrived at Eldredon Farm and were left locked inside the van, and Colin learned that the kidnappers had targeted his family and demanded to see them to make sure that they were well and unharmed. For a brief moment, Colin and his family were reunited. The robbers took Colin to the side of a workshop and showed him a map of the depot. With a gun pointed in his face, Colin revealed potential points of access for the gang in the Securitas depot. From where he stood, he could also see a shotgun, a machine gun, and a handgun. But basically, they were armed with AK-47s, shotguns, scorpions, and they were wearing balaclavas. The robbers then blindfolded the hostages, and they bundled Colin into a Volvo and his wife and child into a Renault lorry, and they began to drive to the depot. During the journey, the robbers removed the masking tape from Colin's eyes and hand and handed his glasses back to him to avoid arousing the suspicion of other staff members at the Securitas depot. After more than an hour, the robbery was over, and the Renault lorry left carrying more than £52 million in cash. More than £153 million was left behind in the depot. There were two men lingering in the depot to ensure that the lorry could get a head start. Driving back to Eldredon Farm, the robbers were elated to have made out at the gates of the Securitas depot without any problems or hitches. So how did it all happen? So less than half an hour after leaving Eldredon Farm, a convoy consisting of a Renault lorry carrying Lynn and Craig, a Volvo S60 occupied by Colin and an armed robber, and a Vauxhall Vectra with the rest of the gang inside arrived at the gates of the Securitas depot. Fearing for the safety of his family, Colin Dixon approached the building and opened the side door. The armed robber, posing as a policeman and trailing closely behind him, quickly followed Colin into the building and reminded him what is at stake if he didn't fully comply. Colin knocked on the door of the control room inside the building. There was a night watchman, Gary Barkley, who was working at his desk. Little did he know that an armed robber was just centimetres behind Colin, ready to pounce or shoot should something go wrong. The armed robber then appeared from behind the depot manager and pointed his gun at Gary, who was told by his boss to do as he is ordered. Colin instructs the front gates to be opened to allow the waiting vehicles carrying the rest of the gang and his wife and child to enter the courtyard. Having gained access to the building, the 7 robbers, clad in black clothing and wearing balaclavas, entered the depot carrying a machine gun, a pump-action shotgun, a handgun, and a weapon which was similar to an AK-47 rifle. Once inside, they rounded up more than a dozen staff members and tied them up, putting some in the cages used to transport goods around the building. With everyone in the building incapacitated, 2 members of the gang loaded up the 7.5-ton lorry which had pulled up outside a loading bay, and quickly and calmly they crammed £53 million into the large vehicle. So who are the people involved? The first person, Stuart Royal, was a used car salesman. He was from Maidstone and he already had a reputation for ripping off people. He set up a Watering Berry car sales with John Fowler, who was charged but later cleared of any involvement in the plot. He claimed to have been a former member of the Special Boat Service. However, there was no record of him ever serving in the SBS. There was Roger Coots. He was from Gravesend, and Coots was charged after £9 million of the stolen money was recovered from a car park in Welling which he rented, the largest amount of money recovered from the raid. He was caught on CCTV tying up 9 members of staff at the Securitas depot. There was Lee Rusher, and he was a roofer and a part-time driver from Tonbridge Wells. When his home was searched, a plan of the Securitas depot bearing his fingerprints was found, together with a video of a reconnaissance mission to the home of depot manager Colin Dixon, who was kidnapped before the raid. Police found £8.6 million in cash in a lock-up garage rented by Rusher's cousin and found a gun and ammunition in his shed. Jetmir Bukpapa, he was a Kosovan Albanian, and he became involved in the plot through his friendship with Lee Rusher. His job in the heist was to organise a reconnaissance of the home of depot manager Colin Dixon. Bukpapa was the son of an engineer and a teacher, and he came to Britain 9 years before the raid, seeking a better life, and had married an English woman who he met in a gym. He lived in Tonbridge and worked as a doorman while making extra money selling cannabis. And he had met co-offender Hessinaj in a coffee shop. So Hessinaj was an insider who worked at the Securitas depot and provided crucial inside information to the gang by filming the inside of the depot using a tiny hidden camera fixed to his belt. He arrived in the UK from Albania back in 1999 illegally and left 5 years later when asylum was refused. However, Ensaj went on to marry an English woman and returned to the UK back in January 2005. And then there was Lee Murray, and he is thought to have been the mastermind behind the heist. However, he wasn't jailed until June the 1st, 2010 in Morocco. He was also an MMA fighter, and he previously lived in Sidcup and traded in London. He fled to Morocco 4 days after the Securitas depot robbery. So Murray and fellow gang member Paul Allen hoped to live in Africa off what they had made in the robbery and bought villas, drugs and jewellery while spending thousands of pounds on plastic surgery for their partners. Murray's initial sentence was just 10 years, but it was later increased to 25 years. After they were caught, Allen was extradited back to the UK in October 2009 and he was sentenced to 18 years at Woolwich Crown Court after pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit robbery, conspiracy to kidnap and conspiracy to possess a firearm. Allen pleaded guilty but denied he was ever at the Tonbridge depot on the day of the robbery or played any part in kidnapping the manager and his family. So back to the story. With so much money stolen and little time to plan what came, each man carried out as much as he could and made his getaway, waiting for the right moment to make the next move. As the news of the heist spread like wildfire, the next morning, the eye of every police officer in the country was on the lookout for the robbers. As I said, within 5 days, police had made several arrests across the UK and had managed to capture 3 of the gang members. A global manhunt for at least 16 fugitives led investigators to multiple locations around the world, including Cyprus, Morocco, Albania and the West Indies. By July, police had 6 people in custody. All denied their part in the heist. At least 2 of the men connected to the robbery have never been caught. The makeup artist, who helped disguise the men with prosthetics and makeup, arrested initially by police as part of the conspiracy, became a crucial prosecution witness as she was the only person able to identify the gang without their disguises. The crux of the prosecution's case rested on a conversation between Murray and Russia discussing the robbery, which had accidentally been recorded on a mobile phone. In January 2007, Bukpapa, Hesinaj, Coots, Royal and Russia were convicted of kidnap, robbery and firearms offences at the Old Bailey. All except Hesinaj received life sentences, while the robbery's inside man was given a 20-year term. Murray, who claimed Moroccan nationality to avoid extradition, was sentenced in 2008 in Rabat in Morocco for his part in the robbery and was given a prison sentence of 25 years. Police have recovered £21 million of stolen cash, but more than £30 million remains missing. Its whereabouts is still a mystery. Colin Dixon and his family went into hiding and were given new identities and a new place to call home, far away from the nightmare they endured.